I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Jordan Bateman, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, their website taxpayer.com. Welcome back to the show, Jordan.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
The carbon tax that Ottawa announced out of the blue without any consultation with the provinces, was that a shock for you?
Well, the timing was a shock, not the fact that they did it. I thought that Trudeau would give a little bit more lip service to trying to negotiate a deal with all the different premiers. Certainly, he in the election campaign, he did mention that he wanted a carbon tax, but he was very clear in the debates that he wouldn't just impose it on the premiers, that he wanted to negotiate it out. And if you recall, one of his big criticisms of Prime Minister Harper was the fact that Harper never sat down and tried to talk with premiers. So, minutes before he goes into this meeting with the premiers, he announces to the public that he's going to unilaterally impose this thing. And no wonder so many of the premiers were pretty upset about it.
Well, also, too, what a shock to the Canadian economy at a time most people are expecting it to go into recession.
Yeah, well, I mean, Trudeau certainly thinks it's going to go into recession. That's part of his pitch for running $100 billion worth of deficit spending over the next 4 years. The idea that we need all this economic stimulus with borrowed money to try to stave off the recession. Now, preliminary numbers that have come in so far show Canada is not in recession. It's modest growth, but definitely not in recession. But still, they cling to it. They kind of speak out of both sides of their mouth here. On one side, they say, "Oh, we're going to have a recession, so we need to have all this stimulus spending borrowed and paid for by your children and grandchildren." And then on the other side, no, the economy is more than strong enough to handle a carbon tax, even on provinces that don't want it.
Now, what is this carbon tax going to add to the average person's gasoline bill and heating bill if they use natural gas?
Well, in British Columbia, we're already a little bit down this street, right? So we're at what's called a $30 per ton carbon tax. Now, that number means nothing to ordinary people because who on earth knows how many tons of greenhouse gases they emit from year to year. But it's going to go from that $30 level to $50 within 5 years. So right now in BC, we pay about 6.7, 6.8 cents per liter of gasoline just in carbon tax. That should go up probably closer to 11 cents a liter once the Trudeau tax is fully in place. And then, of course, we get levied GST on top of that because carbon tax and gasoline is one of those taxes on tax where you end up having to pay GST on top of it. So, at a time where we already pay 48 cents a liter in gas taxes in the Lower Mainland, we're going to add another nickel that I think for most people will continue to drive them to the United States quite literally to fill up to save some money.
Does it reach a point where the government starts to lose money because so many people are bailing out across the border?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, this is the theory behind the tipping point, right? So we saw it with BC ferries fares where all of a sudden people stopped taking the ferry quite as much because the prices were too high. Anytime you make it more attractive for people to go across the border, they will. Right now, the dollar is fairly low, but even still, you can save money by crossing the border. A couple of years ago, we did a look at this. The dollar was a little bit stronger, but essentially the difference in gas prices between the United States and Canada, if you're in Surrey and you cross the border into Blaine, the difference, 95% of it was taxes. We overtax gasoline here in Canada. They, in the States, have a very reasonable level of gas taxation that results in lower prices for them.
And speaking of energy, we had a theory or a statement or some kind of thing that made us believe that the mayor of Vancouver, Gregor Robertson, wanted to ban natural gas by 2050.
Yeah, so tying into all this kind of carbon talk is, efforts by individual politicians to try to, well, I don't know. Well, in Vancouver's case, they want to eliminate all greenhouse gas emissions from the city of Vancouver by 2050. It's a completely implausible goal. I mean, it's as ridiculous a goal as Mayor Robertson's plan to end street homelessness by 2015. It cannot happen. It won't happen. But he's going to cling to it and try to regulate it. The funny thing about Robertson is he pushed back against us. He swears up and down that he's not banning natural gas, even though if you look at their 2050 vision, natural gas is responsible for exactly 0% of the energy sources in Vancouver at that time. He now claims that he means to move us all to renewable natural gas, which sounds wonderful in theory, but it's 4 times the price of regular natural gas. It's not all that much cleaner, and most of it is created from methane from landfill sites. And I, for one, would like to know where the mayor of Vancouver is planning to put the 8 or 9 landfill sites inside city limits that will suddenly create all of this methane and renewable natural gas. We both know, of course, that's ridiculous. He'll never do it. Fortis will never get to that level of renewable natural gas in the foreseeable future. And, the bureaucrats will continue to push down this avenue of getting rid of natural gas. And anytime you need a building permit, a renovation, you build a new house or building, you'll be forced off natural gas and into the more expensive electricity.
Well, what about all those hydro ads that tell us safe, clean, reliable natural gas? Get rid of your electric stove and switch to natural gas.
Well, I think that's exactly it. And that's why Robertson's trying to cling to this fiction of renewable natural gas. It amazes me that he stands there and brags that, City Hall, for example, is run on renewable natural gas. Well, congratulations, your worship. You're spending 4 times the cost to heat and power City Hall that you should be spending. Taxpayers should be outraged by the fact that City Hall thinks it's fine to spend 4 times the amount on natural gas that it should be spending. But, when it's other people's money, they're a lot more into it. And, this is the problem, circling back to the carbon tax, right, is, Trudeau brings in this carbon tax goal. Premiers like Stephen McNeil, Nova Scotia, Brad Wall in Saskatchewan, the premier of the Yukon, they want to do things in a different way. They have a mandate to govern in a certain way. And frankly, energy is something that up till now has been a provincial responsibility. Trudeau has a mandate to govern a different way, and these two are now in conflict. So it'll be interesting to see. Wall is musing about actually taking the federal government to court. I don't like to see money wasted on court challenges, but if there's an avenue there to stop a major tax grab by the federal government, then I think we should support them in doing that.
Well, they have no plans for this tax either. Where is it going to go? Well, I'll leave that up to the provinces. Well, will a province that didn't want it in the first place make any decision about it? I think they'll, like you said, use the money to fight them in court.
Exactly. They claim, Trudeau claims that he likes the BC revenue neutral tax. But there's no provision in the law or in the announcement that all these provinces have to pass revenue neutral taxes. In Alberta, they claim their tax is revenue neutral, but you actually look at it, and it's not. They just spend that money on other infrastructure in Alberta. Here in BC, what should be concerning for a lot of us is that virtually every tax credit announced by the BC Liberal government in the past 7 years has been funded out of the carbon tax. So it's not really a tax cut or a tax credit when they announce it, because we're spending money on the carbon tax. However, we now exceed in carbon tax credits, we now exceed revenues by about $600 million, which means conceivably they could actually go to the Trudeau level, raise our gas taxes, and not have to provide another nickel of tax relief, and still technically be revenue neutral. Of course, it's not customer neutral or taxpayer neutral. I mean, some taxpayers get dinged a lot more than they'll ever get back, but it's another flaw in that whole argument.
The BC government also refuses to target the money raised from the carbon tax, such as expanding rapid transit or buying more transit buses to get more cars off the road.
Well, I don't, I actually agree with them on that. They should not spend that money. What I'd like to see is, look, I'd like to see no carbon tax. But if you're going to have this carbon tax and claim it's revenue neutral, It should flow back 50-50 in small business tax cut, have a corporate tax cut, and in a personal income tax cut. And you shouldn't have all these weird little things. Like the whole film industry, well, it's corporate welfare, really. The $500 million the BC government spends every year on the film industry is all funded out of carbon tax revenue. Well, that may employ 20,000 people across the province, but only those 20,000 people are benefiting. It pains me to think that, you have Sony or DreamWorks or ABC Studios or Netflix taking more money home from the carbon tax than most British Columbians will ever see in their lifetime.
We'll have more with Jordan Bateman right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Jordan Bateman, talking about the film industry and the carbon tax. They found out the film industry in Los Angeles was one of their bigger polluters, is that they use inefficient lighting. All their explosions and special effects are polluting the atmosphere. So if you're going to use carbon tax credits to fund the film industry, you're actually helping to produce carbon, not reduce it.
Yeah, and one of the funniest things about the film industry is they say, look, these guys from Hollywood can get on a plane and fly anywhere in the world and spend their money. That's why we have to give them these tax credits to come to BC. Well, they fly here and they're flying, creating greenhouse gas emissions on the way. So it doesn't make sense to be funding this out of carbon tax. But, when you're the provincial government, you got to look like you're spending this money on tax credits. What better way than to get rid of $500 million of it to the film industry? The problem is, the film industry has never been able to produce a credible study showing that we get even half that money back in provincial taxes. So the Treasury actually loses money on the film industry in British Columbia. Mike DeYoung knows it. That's why he's trying to slowly wean them off of it a little bit. The industry knows it. That's why they can't produce any reports proving that it's a money maker for British Columbia. And sure as heck, the Hollywood studios know it. That's why they keep coming here, because they want that money, as much money as possible in their coffers. Because frankly, the entertainment industry isn't as lucrative as it once was.
Something that's coming up on the 17th of October is the new mortgage rules, and some people feel that it could automatically reduce the value of your house by 20%. That means a lower value to the house and fewer dollars for municipalities, so they'd have to hike your property tax, wouldn't they?
Yeah, so maybe not. I mean, it depends. If everyone's values go down the same, yes, the mill rate would go up, but generally they do it by a dollar amount. So the dollar figure on an average property should stay the same. So as long as you go down the same as everyone else, it should basically come out neutral. Although you are paying, the same dollar figure on a house that's worth less. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. But look, more concerning is a 20% reduction sounds great in theory until you start doing the math about your own house. Or you think about the people who are, stretched thin on mortgages and whatnot. The last thing you want to do is put anyone underwater. And, this is a 20% drop puts a lot of people in a precarious financial position.
Right. Why would you pay a mortgage on a house that isn't worth as much as the mortgage you took out on it?
Yeah, and we saw that in the States during the Great Recession of '08, is people who were foreclosed, yes, but other people who just walked away from their homes because, they'd gotten in at high interest rates, at very low money down, property dipped below it, and, it just made better financial sense for them to walk away. So, I get pretty, these people who claim they wanted price correction, sounds great in theory, but, when that happens, you're actually going to be hurting real families, real homeowners. I'm not sure that it's as attractive a possibility as they let on.
Well, I'm sure it sounds politically very attractive going into an election, like the 15% foreign buyer tax in Greater Vancouver. Sounds great, but in reality, that flow of money has pretty well dried up anyway.
Yeah, I mean, house sales were already dropping before the tax came in. The cyclical nature of real estate, and Jim, you've been covering this market for a long time. You could tell us all the ups and downs year by year by year. These things go up and then they go down and they come back up again. So, I'm not so sure about the political strategy, honestly. If there was a 20% price reduction, I think a lot of people would be upset about it. And I think a lot of homeowners would take a second look. And you got to remember, generally homeowners vote at higher rates than renters. The longer you're entrenched in a community, the more financial investment you have in that community, the more likely you are to vote. That's what the studies show. I'm not sure you want a whole bunch of angry property owners out there going to the polls if you're the BC Liberals.
Well, speaking of the BC Liberals, are they preparing a new provincial budget yet?
Yeah, so last week I actually presented at the Finance Committee. It's a bipartisan committee of the legislature. They go around the province looking for ideas on what should be in the budget. So the budget work is well underway. Their public consultation finishes up on the 14th of October. And then they will write their report. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Finance is working on their preliminary numbers. So yeah, election budget, we'll get that in the third week of February. Mike DeYoung will deliver it. My understanding is in the spring, February, we'll see maybe 3, maybe 4 weeks of a legislative session. Essentially a speech from the throne, the budget, they'll get that all passed, and then they'll suspend the House and go into the election period. So not too much more governing or lawmaking coming from our legislators. Looks like just 3 or 4 weeks in February.
What do you think of the BC government canceling the fall sitting of the legislature?
Yeah, I don't have as much a problem with it as some people do. I'm not clamoring for more laws, regulations, and legislation to be passed. I know others do. Certainly the NDP hate it because they can't get the question period questions going and generate the free media out of that. But honestly, feel free government to quit passing regulations, quit passing so many laws. I think we've got plenty, so I'm not as bothered by it as the opposition party.
What were your recommendations for the budget?
Yeah, we went 3 points. So first of all, BC debt. So even though the provincial government's balanced the budget all 4 years of this term, frankly, their surplus has come to about $4.7 billion this term. That's still less than the $5.1 billion they borrowed the 4 years previous. So they lost ground that way, but they also lost ground in capital debt. So the BC government just, in 2006 had gotten the debt down to about $33 billion. Today it's $68 billion. It's headed towards $72 billion. BC government continues to borrow money at an alarming rate. So we were pushing them to prioritize better and to quit putting BC further and further into debt, past not just a balanced operating budget, but a truly balanced overall budget where the capital spending is also included in that. Then we also asked them to kill the MSP tax. We think it's time for that tax to be wound down. Take 2 or 4 years if you have to and wean it out that way. But that's an unfair tax that we've talked about many times and we want to see it go. And then the third point is a little bit more nebulous, but very important. We asked them to not just blanket accept Justin Trudeau's stimulus money simply because it's 50-cent dollars, but to actually stop and look at whether or not the priorities being funded actually match the priorities of the province and the cities that will get the money. So just because the federal government comes with a big check for something doesn't mean necessarily it's a good deal for BC taxpayers, because ultimately it's British Columbia taxpayers who are on the hook for all the operating costs. So you want to make sure you're actually only getting money or only doing things, building things that actually have long-term value. Even 50-cent dollars can be wasteful if they're not the right projects. So we all think of the some of the economic stimulus stuff from 2008, gazebos, things like that, things that don't generate any any money for the public or any real social good. It's just a cost of maintenance and operating. Those are things that should be double checked. So don't rush in just because Trudeau is shoveling borrowed money off the back of the truck.
Of course, the theory is, well, we'll never get that money later down the road, so why not take it now?
Yeah, the problem is, though, for things that you don't need, who cares, right? Like, okay, so, I say to you, Jim, hey, here's, I'll pay for half of well, it's not, you can't even compare it to normal things, right? Like, if someone came up to us and said, look, I'll pay for half of a brand new Lamborghini for you, you might try to do it simply because, you could sell the Lamborghini the day after you take possession and get your money and part of theirs back. But you can't do the same with a gazebo or a trail or, a road or whatever, a bridge, whatever it is that they come with money for. So you better make sure you actually need that because government can't sell those assets after. So we wanted to make sure that they were actually looking for, what's funding priorities that match what British Columbia actually needs.
Yes, and I've seen some pretty elaborate artworks along trails that maybe 5 people a week go along.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Like more and more, there's this push to beautify, and I understand that. Everyone wants to live in pretty areas, but some of those things now are, spreading from where actual people see it on a regular basis to more obscure areas. There's a great story about a $90,000 piece of art going into a roundabout in Surrey. And the neighbors are just mystified by this because it's this tiny traffic circle in a very quiet suburban community, where the same, 50 people or so will see this piece of art day after day after day and no one else will. And, they're saying, well, let's just, take the art out of there. Yeah, sure, build the traffic circle, but spend the extra $90,000 on sidewalks in our neighborhood or, spend it somewhere on school lunch programs and leave us dirt in the middle of the traffic circle. We'll we'll have a little community garden in there and plant plants. Perfectly reasonable, but, cities are constantly stretching beyond current limits.
Do you think there should almost be an intelligence test for politicians? I mean, it's one of the few jobs where there's no university training for it, no special courses. You don't have to meet any qualifications, to get it. Should there actually be qualifications for somebody running for office?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, right? Because you don't want to, it is about, we live in a representative democracy, so you want people who represent all walks of life. I would be insanely curious to know, what some of our average IQs are on some of the councils around the province especially. So it's hard to have that preliminary test and, when there is no, yeah, you want people from all walks of life, so you'd hate to think that only the academic elites could actually do anything.
Well, but your academic training has nothing to do with your IQ.
True. Yeah, true. Frankly, I'd rather see a little bit more common sense on councils than a higher IQ. I'm not sure how you measure that.
Right, and the common sense meter, how accurate is that?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, I've been at the council table and you get this flow of paper, generated by the bureaucrats. You get a little bit of Stockholm syndrome because essentially, they have you, for hours and hours a day. And it becomes harder and harder to, kind of divide, what is actually important to the people who elected you, what's important to the community and what's just simply a priority of the municipality. Sure, art projects in important areas might be something that a municipality wants to spend money on, but in random roundabouts in suburban neighborhoods, that's where you've kind of jumped the shark.
Well, how about they just draw up a simple list like you might do on your own household budget? This is what I want. This is what I need.
Well, exactly. And I always thought that, politicians should find out, what the average taxpayer pays to their level of government taxes. In Langley, when I was in council, it was about $2,500 in taxes that the average household paid to the township of Langley. So I would kind of do the math in my head, right? Like, okay, so this is such and such a project. Well, geez, that's 67 people's taxes this year. Is that really worth it? And when you take it from sort of nebulous money and, out of a $150 million budget, instead you actually have real people attached to it, it sort of makes you take a step back and say, maybe that isn't the best way to spend those 67 people's tax dollars.
Jordan, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Hey, anytime.
My guest has been Jordan Bateman, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Check out the website taxpayer.com. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be emailed to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.